Appium Project Lead Committer and Director of Open Source for Sauce Labs. Jonathan?
Thanks very much, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone who's joined us from all across the internet. I'm really excited today to be introducing officially the new Appium graphical interface called Appium Desktop. Most of you have likely either seen screenshots or demos already, or maybe have been using it yourself. And I basically hope to just go through more in-depth demos, making sure that you understand all of the features that Appium Desktop has to offer. So first, a little bit about me. I'm the Director of Open Source at Sauce Labs, which means I lead a small team of people that make sure that we're taking care of the open source ecosystem that we rely on at Sauce and that our customers rely on. Our biggest project is, of course, Appium in terms of our commitments and our commits. So we've been working on Appium for a long time. I'm also the project lead for Appium and the architect of the current architecture. And it's been about 4 years now since I started working on Appium, and it's been a really fun ride. And just wanted to say thank you to all of you in the audience who have either contributed code to Appium or contributed documentation or let us know about bugs that you found, because without you there wouldn't be a project. And I say to everyone that I talk to about Appium that it's really our community that has made Appium successful more than any code or efforts on the part of myself or Sauce Labs. So thanks to you for making this a great project. And we're really excited to continue to move forward with the project and work on new extensions and new features and even new apps like Appium Desktop. So if you joined us today and you're just kind of curious about this whole Appium thing and you're not really sure what it is, but you think it might be cool, I just have a couple slides for you. Although today's presentation is not primarily an introduction to Appium as a technology, it's primarily an introduction to Appium Desktop, which is a specific desktop application built to make using Appium easier. So if you're here today and you don't really know anything at all about Appium, then I'm afraid I'm going to have to refer you to some of the online documentation and many other videos and webinar recordings and other things out there that can help you understand what Appium is in general. But just by way of a very brief introduction, Appium is a cross-platform framework to allow you to automate native web and hybrid mobile apps. And actually, as Appium has moved into the present and the future, we're going sort of to mobile and beyond, I should say, where we now offer the automation of Windows desktop apps and even more recently, Mac apps in addition to our core mobile offering. But Appium is all about automation. Basically, it's giving you the power to write code that automates the apps that you care about. And of course, most people want to automate apps for the purpose of testing them. So Appium is extremely useful for end-to-end functional testing of basically all of your apps. So if you have used Appium in the past, you might be familiar with something like this, where you have installed Appium via npm, and now you're just running it from the command line. And you get a little message saying, all right, here's the Appium server. We're up and listening. We're ready for your test scripts to start requesting sessions and sending test commands and so on. So this is really the core of Appium. It's an invisible piece of software that runs as a server on your machine or some machine in your network or a cloud service like Sauce Labs, enabling you to send requests for automation sessions, and then within those sessions to send automation commands to tell your app to do things or to tell the device to do things. So that's Appium. Appium Desktop is a point-and-click interface for using Appium, as well as a bundled inspector to help you understand how the app that you want to automate is actually constructed. And of course, it's important to know how your app is structured so that when you go to automate it, you have the right knowledge to be able to find the elements in your application, the user interface elements that you want to do something with, that you want to interact with, whether it's finding a button so that you can tap it, whether it's finding a text field so that you can make an assertion about its contents. The inspector is very useful for that. So that's all Appium Desktop is. It's just a wrapper around Appium that gives you a point-and-click interface for starting up the Appium server, for seeing its logs, and then an inspector that you can launch that gives you the ability to take a look at your application structure from the perspective of Appium and perform a couple basic interactions. So that's what we've got, and I'll be telling you all about that in the webinar today. So again, there's no more command line here. If you want to run Appium Desktop, basically you launch a desktop application on your computer. You can start the Appium server, see the very same Appium log messages here that we saw in the command line, only now we have a graphical interface. And I'll demonstrate the inspector in the demo time later on. This is just to kind of illustrate these two ways now of using Appium. And Appium Desktop is not the first time that you could use Appium with a point-and-click interface. Those of you who have been using Appium for years will remember appium.app or appium.exe, which are the predecessors to Appium Desktop. And these were really great applications made by Dan Cuellar and a bunch of other contributors. And they solved the same problem that Appium Desktop solves, except unfortunately they fell into a lack of maintenance, and the code was not maintainable by the Appium core team. And there were a couple other things we wanted to fix. So we kind of did a reset, started Appium Desktop from scratch, and now it's a fully supported, fully maintained graphical interface to Appium and an inspector that will continue to work with future versions of Appium because of the way that it's developed and because of the team that's maintaining it. So all that to say, you might be familiar with something that is kind of like this, and you might be scratching your head saying, is this the same thing? And it's not the same thing, but this is the spiritual successor to it. All right. So the differences in a nutshell: regular Appium that you install on the command line and use on the command line, you would install via npm, whereas Appium Desktop you install by downloading, a disk image or an exe installer for Windows. With Appium CLI, you would launch it from the terminal, as you saw in the little movie. And Appium Desktop, you'd launch however you launch apps on your computer. If you had parameters or options that you wanted to use to start the Appium server with, on the command line interface, you'd pass those in as parameters or command line flags. With Appium Desktop, they're graphical options, little UI widgets that you can interact with in order to set those options. From the command line, the only way that you could start a session was to build up your set of desired capabilities in a test script and run that test script from the command line or from Jenkins or something else and have it target the Appium server. With Appium Desktop, it's a bit different. You can actually build a set of desired capabilities and launch an inspector session from Appium Desktop itself. So you don't actually need to break out your Java IDE or write a Python script or write a Node script or anything like that in order to launch a session just to poke around an app. So this is a really big improvement in just kind of getting some desired capabilities working, starting a session, and playing around with Appium. Of course, the command line version had no visual app inspector. That's sort of an app that we built on top of Appium that now comes with Appium Desktop. And happily, platform support is the same for both versions of Appium. They both run on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And of course, I'm using a Mac today for my demo, so you'll see the Mac version. But because we've developed Appium Desktop as an Electron application using web technologies, the experience and functionality is identical across all platforms, with the caveat, of course, that if you want to test iOS applications, you'll need functional iOS simulators or real devices connected to Xcode, which requires a Macintosh computer and operating system, unless you've done something clever and figured out a way around that. Okay, before we get too far into our presentation today, I wanted to do a little community poll that we can come back to before the end, just to kind of get a feel for where people are at in their use of the Appium tool. So the question that I want to ask is, when you're writing your Appium scripts, do you feel more comfortable kind of working in a visual IDE and using visual tools? Or do you feel more comfortable kind of going straight to your code editor, straight to the command line, using page source and all of the rest to write and run your tests? So basically, I'm just trying to get an impression of, who's going to really find Appium Desktop to be a game changer because they're really into these visual tools, and who's going to say, well, that's cool, but I'm going to stick with the command line because that's where I live. So just kind of curious what you guys think about that. So we'll come back with those answers at a later point in the webinar. Just a note about requirements. The requirements for Appium Desktop are basically the same as the requirements for Appium. There's nothing additional that you need. Of course, Appium's requirements can be substantial depending on the kind of testing that you want to do. And this is not because of Appium itself, it's because the tools that are required to run iOS simulators or run Android emulators are bundled with packages from Apple or Google or other providers that you have to have ready to go on your system. So if you're curious about these requirements, you can refer to our documentation. There's nothing extra that you need for Appium Desktop. There we go. Suddenly lost the ability to control my machine. Okay, so here we are. How do you download and install Appium? Basically, you can go to the Appium Desktop page on GitHub, and we have a releases tab on that page. You can click on that, and you'll see all the releases that we've ever made. We're currently in beta for the 1.0 release. I think we're up to beta 5 or 6 now. So if you haven't downloaded Appium Desktop yet, this is where you can get it. And then you simply find the attached file for your platform, whether that's the DMG for Mac or the exe for Windows. We also have an app image binary for Ubuntu, which some people have been using very successfully. So that's pretty awesome. Okay, so let's get right to it and actually take a walkthrough of Appium Desktop. If I can figure out, there we go. Okay, on this new desktop, you can see that I've got Appium Desktop up and running, and I have an iPhone simulator over here hanging out, waiting in the wings for its debut. So there's a couple options when you first load up Appium Desktop. The main path you can follow is just to start a basic server. You can adjust the host or the port if you want. So if we go ahead and do that, what you have is the Appium console log window, which shows you the log output from the Appium server, the same stuff you're used to from the command line, and it's just a little bit more nicely colored here. So that's starting a simple server. We can also click on the Advanced tab here, and I make this window a little bigger. We can see the various server options, server flags that are available to Appium, and you can play around with them however you want. For example, let's say I want to make sure to log the timestamps for all the log messages so I can do some time comparisons. And then there are iOS and Android specific options. Of course, if you want to use any of these, we recommend that you consult the documentation, make sure that you know what you're doing, because these can change the behavior of Appium in ways you don't expect. So don't just play around here for no reason. So with this custom, let's change something else here. Let's run on 4725. I can start the server again. We can see that Appium has detected that we've sent in some non-default server arguments with the port and the log timestamp here. And you can see that we are logging the timestamps in addition to the normal log output. Now let's say that I have a custom configuration here that I'm interested in using again, and I want it to persist after I've quit Appium Desktop. Well, I can actually save this as a preset here. So I could call it webinar demo for the sake of this webinar. And now this preset has been saved. So if I go over to the presets tab, here's a preset I saved a while ago, and here's a preset that I saved today for our desktop. And you can see all of the server arguments and their values. You can notice that here's the non-default port that we've specified. And of course, I can now start Appium from this preset as well if I want. So that's the server window for starting a server. Now let's just go back and start a regular old Appium server. And again, this is the log window. The only thing you haven't seen here is what happens when you click this button, which says Start New Session. So let's go ahead and click this. And basically what this does is give us a way to start an inspector session either on the Appium server that we have running, or on a custom server, or on a cloud service, for example, Sauce Labs or Test Object. So let's talk about each of these different options of servers. So here we have the default, which is the automatic server. So as you can see, it says that it will use the currently running Appium Desktop server at this host and this port. So that's good. That's what we want right now. Let's say I wanted to connect to an instance of Appium running somewhere else on my network, somewhere that wasn't localhost, or some cloud service that isn't yet officially supported by Appium Desktop, or any other thing like that. We can specify a remote host and a remote port here under custom server. We can also enter our Sauce Labs credentials if we want to run an inspector session on a Sauce Labs simulator or emulator. Likewise, we can enter our test object API key if we want to run on a test object real device. So I'll show you demos of each of these options shortly, but for now let's go back to the automatic server. So that's server selection. The other thing that you can do on this new session window is construct a set of desired capabilities. Now, desired capabilities, if you're not familiar with Appium, are basically a set of keys and values that tell the Appium server what kind of thing you want to automate. Because with Appium, you can automate Android devices, you can automate iOS simulators, you can automate a whole host of things. And so this is basically a way of creating a new session that is exactly what you want and not something random. So for example, if we tried to create a session here without specifying any desired capabilities, we will of course get an error. In this case, it says you must include a platform name capability. Okay, great. So we can begin to construct platform name, a capability here. Let's say we want it to be iOS. And now we can simply click the plus button to add a new capability. And the capabilities themselves are not pre-specified by Appium Desktop. So we give you complete freedom to use or not use any capabilities that you want, which means that in order to use Appium Desktop's new session window successfully, you'll want to consult the capabilities documentation or look at one of your existing scripts and pull the capabilities from there. So this is really great, but as you can imagine, if you have a huge set of complex capabilities, you might want to use them more than once. You might want to go back and edit them. So we give you the ability to save a set of desired capabilities. So I've already saved a number of them here. So if I click on one, you can see that we have a JSON representation of this set of desired capabilities, which does include the platform name capability and other required capabilities like platform version, device name, and app. So if I want, I can edit this, and it will take me back to this window where I've got the various capabilities, and you can see that for some of them, we can even change the type of capability to make sure that we're generating the JSON object which the Appium server will interpret correctly. So just by way of showing you where the documentation is at, if you do have a web browser, You can go to Appium on GitHub. This is also in our documentation on the website, but if you want the latest, then you can just go to GitHub. There's a file called capes.md, which has all of the server capabilities that Appium supports on top of the normal Selenium ones. So here you can read about all the capabilities for both Android, iOS, and other platforms that you might be able to use fruitfully with Appium Desktop. So that's where you can go for information on capabilities. So let's go ahead and use this saved set that I have, which is going to test a simple test application on iOS 10.2. So if you click Start Session, you'll see that this window is just kind of doing something, waiting for Appium to start the session. But of course, if we look at the server log here, we'll see what it's really doing. It's trying to connect with XUI tests through WebDriver agent and launching the application. And as you can see here on the simulator, that has happened. So now the new session window has turned into the inspector window. Let me make this a little bigger. So the inspector window has a couple different components. First of all, we have a screenshot of what's currently going on with your application on the simulator. And as you mouse over different elements in the screenshot, you'll actually see a little highlighted rectangle appear. This shows you that Appium has recognized this as a particular element. So we might want to interact with some of these in our test scripts. So Appium gives us the ability to determine that these are separate elements. And you can actually even click on one of these, which will help us kind of figure out what's going on here in the middle pane of the inspector window. As you can see, this is the app source. So this is a navigable XML tree, which is parsed from Appium's response to a request for the page source. So you can play around with this and look at whatever you want. But when we clicked on this element over here in the screenshot, we highlighted precisely the element that represents it in the XML source with some of its attributes here. For example, we see that it has a name according to iOS. So once we've selected an element, we can do a couple different things with it. We can look at all of its attributes. So here we have a table. This is everything that was returned from the call to get page source. So it's important to realize that none of this is magic or does anything that you can't do on your own with Appium. We built this on top of Appium with no special magic or special hooks or anything like that. You could also see these attributes and values just by calling the page source command from a script. But we've kind of parsed it here and put it in a format that's much easier to see. So we can see that it has a certain position, certain width and height, which is actually what we use to put together the highlight rectangles that has a certain type and so on. We also have a little table up here which gives a set of recommended locator strategies and selectors. So locator strategy in Appium is a way of finding an element. And here we've detected that the best way to find this particular element is using the accessibility ID locator strategy. And the way that you actually find an element using this strategy is going to differ based on the language you use. So for now, we just tell you, well, use accessibility ID, and you'll be able to figure out what the specific command is in your particular language. And then we give you the selector here. Integer A is the way to get a handle on this particular element. So if we want, we could actually do a couple actions with this element straight from Appium Desktop. So let's send some keystrokes. Let's say 1, 2, 3 here. So now it's doing its thing. And you can actually see that in the actual simulator, the event has taken place. And then we've got another screenshot with the result here. So let's do the same thing over here in the other text element. Hope you see the simulator. And now we can tap on the compute sum button if we want, which, as you can see, actually computes the sum here. So this is the inspector window. If you ever run into any errors, it's always possible that something changed in the application in between the time that Appium Desktop got the page source and you tried to interact with an element. So you might receive an error about an element not being present or something like that. In which case you just click the refresh button here and we'll update the page source so that you're sure that you're looking at the most recent instance of your application structure. If this application supported back button, we could also navigate using the back button here. And then when you're done, you can either just close the window or hit quit. And what that does is actually calls driver.quit under the hood. So now Appium is finished with your session and you get back to the new session window here. So that's how you use the inspector. So now let's go back and look at some other kinds of sessions we can start using cloud services. So let's try a session on Sauce Labs first. So I've got my username and access key here. And now just because I have my username and access key here doesn't mean that the capabilities are necessarily set to go. So you want to make sure that you have capabilities that are going to work successfully. So let's see, let's do an example of an Android app on Sauce, because maybe I don't have the Android SDK installed locally, so I want to just use Sauce to inspect my application that somebody handed to me. So you can see the set of capabilities here are what you'd expect. I can even specify a particular version of Appium on Sauce if I want. So let's go ahead and try and start this. Now Sauce is provisioning a brand new virtual machine and starting an emulator from scratch based on my session request. So it might take a couple minutes for the emulator to become available, but we should be able to see that it's spinning up in my Sauce Labs account. So let's go over to my web browser and check that out. Oh yes, so now we can see that we've got an unnamed test running here. If I wanted, I could have added the name capability and given it a nice name. But so we can see that actually this test is running on Sauce and it's provisioning the VM and doing all the things that I mentioned it was doing. So it's currently waiting to show us that. So we'll just sit here for another minute or two and hope that before too long, the application will be ready on Sauce. And here it is. So again, here's our inspector window. And now we've got the API demos application. This is not running locally. This is running on Sauce. So to prove that, let's just find an element here and tap on it. So you can see also that the XML structure is a bit different. And we've got two options for finding this element, either accessibility ID or ID. So let's get into this area here. Okay, and now if we go back to our Sauce page, we can see that indeed, using this video, we have navigated to this particular area. Of course, if I want, I can control the emulator on Sauce as well and tap into here. And I can go refresh Appium Desktop and see where we currently are. So it works basically just the way you'd expect. So let's close down that session. And let's try a test object test. So again, I've got my test object API key, which I found on my test object account page. If you're not familiar with test object, by the way, it's a company that we recently acquired at Sauce Labs that has really fantastic real device testing with first-class support of Appium and also some other frameworks. So let's pull up an example of this. Test object sample app. This looks good. My capabilities here are the ones that I found at their website that I should use. So I'm targeting a Nexus 4, a certain Appium version, an app ID to tell them which app I want to automate. So I'm just using their own sample application, and then I've given this test a name. So I can start this test here. And again, let's go check the test object page and see what's happening. There we go. I think I can use GitHub. Right. So we can see that I've actually got this test that I've named here, Appium test number 6, Appium Desktop test is running. So we've got our live view of the device, but by now it should be, oh yes, now it is actually prepared over here. So this is the application, a simple shopping list application. And again, this is actually a real device. It looks like we can just see the screen here, but this is a real device that's sitting in our data center test object. So let's play with it a bit. Let's say that we want to get some milk and cookies. I'm not sure what happened to the live view over here on the test object. Maybe I broke it. Anyway, here we've got milk and cookies in our shopping list. So let's add this, and then you can see that if we wanted to be writing this in code, we have a nice suggestion of the selector to use. Great. We can even declare that this is something that we've actually already purchased on our shopping trip if we want. Great. So this works basically just like you'd expect it to. One more note about the inspector. If you click on an element in this view here that doesn't have a locator, which is accessibility ID or ID, we'll recommend to you an XPath selector. But it's important to note that we show you a warning at the same time, because using XPath locators is often a bad idea. And as I'm going to say in a minute, we have some idea of how to make support for smarter XPath a little better in Appium Desktop. But for now, know that if you get an XPath here, you should be very careful before using weird queries like this. It might make your tests unreliable. So let's quit that. And this is basically all that you need to know about Appium Desktop. The last thing I'll share is that if you just want to run an inspector session on something that isn't the local Appium server, you don't even need to have a server running. You can just go up and go to a new session window here, and we can do this. So we also have the ability to attach to an existing session. So for example, if I had a custom server already running with the session that some other test script is running and I have the session ID, I can just put it in here and click attach the session, and I'll be able to attach the inspector to the particular point at which that session is. So that can be useful if you're in the middle of a REPL session or a debug session and want to attach an inspector. Okay, so if you ever want to update Appium Desktop, there is an auto updater that will inform you that there's a new update. On some platforms, we're having a bit of trouble getting this to work at the moment. So again, you can always go to the releases page, GitHub, Appium Desktop, and then click on releases, which for me is here. And you can see we've got various betas that we've already released, including one that we're about to release. So a few more slides, and then we'll move on to questions. So that's Appium Desktop. Some troubleshooting tips. What do you do when you run into a problem using Appium Desktop? Well, the first thing that you want to do is figure out whether the problem you're experiencing is with Appium Desktop or whether it's actually with Appium itself. Because if it's with Appium itself, then it's not really an issue with Appium Desktop. And Appium Desktop just kind of builds Appium into it. So we don't want users coming to the Appium Desktop repo and saying, oh, Appium Desktop's broken because I couldn't start this session. And then, well, it turns out they didn't use the right capability, or it turns out it's actually a bug in Appium itself. So the way to figure that out is, of course, to try and run your tests with the same capabilities in the Appium command line interface instead of just Appium Desktop. And if the issue is present in both places, that means it's probably not an issue with Appium Desktop, and you should report it as an Appium bug. Now, Appium Desktop issues can certainly occur, and they'll look like not being able to use the UI or some other problem. We had an issue for a while where you couldn't actually use the interface at any time you tapped, nothing would happen. So there's a couple of things that you can do if you run into an experience like that. Actually, Appium Desktop is just a web application. So it's built as an Electron application, which means it just uses Chrome under the hood. So you can actually right-click and hit Inspect and look at console logs, look at errors that might have been thrown, and then you can communicate them to us to give us an idea of where there might be a problem. So let me just show you what that looks like really quick. So if I want, for example, I can right-click and click Inspect Element, and now I have the full Chrome inspector for appium.app. So I can go to the console. If I want, I can sort of see if there have been any errors thrown when I perform actions. You know, the actions I'm taking now don't generate any errors, so that's nice. We're not seeing any of that. But this is a good way if you're having trouble to see if there's something going on with Appium Desktop itself. It might also help you if you want to contribute to the Appium Desktop code. All right. Another issue that I've seen reported quite a bit is people actually downloading Appium Desktop for Mac and just double-clicking the Appium Desktop icon in the disk image itself. And this will cause Appium not to work because Appium actually needs to read and write from your file system, not the file system that is mounted with the disk image. So always make sure that you follow the instructions and copy Appium to your own file system somewhere, like your applications folder, rather than running it from a disk image, and that will keep you from having that particular problem. Otherwise, we've been pretty happy. There haven't been a lot of huge bugs found with Appium Desktop, so people are already using it successfully, and we anticipate releasing an official 1.0 version very soon. So what plans do we have for Appium Desktop? Well, as I mentioned before, we would like to be able to intelligently recommend XPath queries that are going to be as robust as possible by using unique attributes or shortcutting the query so that it starts from the first unique element in the query chain, or other things like that. So we have some thinking to do about that, but we hope to release that. If you came to the webinar a few weeks ago with Dan Cuellar, you saw that Appium now has support for automating Mac desktop applications, and that support has recently been merged into Appium. Unfortunately, Appium for Mac as a driver doesn't yet support the page source command or a couple other things that we need in order to make it useful for an inspector, but you can actually start an Appium for Mac session from Appium Desktop. So this isn't really related to Appium Desktop, but just saying that we hope that this will come soon. I think it'd be really cool to be able to inspect your Mac applications using Appium Desktop as well. WinAppDriver is in a similar position of not returning screenshots and element positions in a way that is usable for the inspector. So you can actually start a WinAppDriver session with Appium Desktop right now, but the inspector isn't very usable. We'd like to add more interactions. Right now we have tap and send keys, but of course you can do other things with elements. So this could help in debugging, for example, just getting the text of an element to verify that that's working with your application. Right now we don't support web view contexts. The main reason is that if you want to inspect the contents of a web view, there are already much better tools to do that. You can attach the Safari inspector to an iOS application or the Chrome inspector to an Android application. So we don't really need that for Appium Desktop, but at the same time, it might be useful to go ahead and enable you to do context switches just to determine that a web view is present, for example, which might help in debugging. So we want to add that. We also want to add the ability to have Appium Desktop record actions that you take with your application and then give you examples of what running those steps would look like in the libraries of your favorite language. This is a feature that the old Appium GUI had that was pretty amazing, and so we hope to re-implement that in Appium Desktop. All right, that's all I have for you today. So thanks very much for your attention, and let's go ahead and move into a time of questions.
That's great, Jonathan. Thank you. And we do have quite a few questions, but I'll start with the good one, which is just installed beta 5 and launched my app. Works real smooth. So there you go. We've got a thumbs up from
awesome.
One of our
well, that is not a question, but I'm very happy to hear that.
You addressed this on the roadmap, but a number of people have written to ask if the desktop will output code for us to use, or is this like a Selenium IDE? And I think you addressed that.
Yeah, let me say another word about that. So something that people often think that they want is a record and playback tool. And you can do record and playback in a variety of ways, some better, some worse. And I'm sort of on the fence about whether I want Appium Desktop to go into that territory. I do think what's really useful and what I want to focus on for the time being is this step recorder and code generator feature, not for the purpose of turning into test code that you actually run in your production test suites, but for the purpose of learning the Appium API, for the purpose of seeing how actions follow one another, and so on. So I think as a pedagogical tool, opening up Appium Desktop, being able to poke around and then see what your actions look like in code is a great way to learn what Appium test code looks like. And sure, maybe to copy and paste a couple lines of that into your test script just to kind of have something to get started with, to make sure you're using the right library functions and so on. But to rely on something that basic to actually build up a test suite is very dangerous, because your test suite is a complex piece of code that needs to be organized, structured, designed, developed in the same way that application code is, with all of the same best practices. And that means using the practices and techniques of good software development. And it's very hard to write a good test suite that is robust, that's modular, that follows the page object model or whatever, with generated code. So I'm not sure that it's going to become this holy grail that people have in mind, but at the very least, I'd like to see us output some generated code as a result of watching you take a few actions so that you can learn the Appium API better.
Great, that makes sense. Have had several folks write in and ask if it's possible to run tests in parallel or to run tests in parallel on Android and iOS.
So if you, the short answer is no. That's not really what Appium Desktop is designed for. If you want to run multiple Appium sessions locally, the way to do that is by running multiple instances of Appium server on different ports. Now, I guess there's nothing that would prevent us from enabling you to have multiple Appium server windows open on different ports. That might be something that we would add. So actually, maybe I'll walk that no back. You can't do it right now, so that's clear. But maybe there's a way for us to enable you to open up different server windows and even different inspector windows. I haven't thought too deeply about that. But yeah, today, if you want to run tests in parallel, the way to do it is get multiple instances going on the command line.
Okay, very good. Again, I believe this was covered, but just to reinforce the point, the question is, does Appium Desktop work with real iOS devices or just simulators?
It works with real iOS devices as well. I've used that before. I don't have my phone connected to my computer at the moment, or I'd try and give it a demo of that. But yeah, there's no difference at all, other than you need to set your capabilities correctly using your UDID. And of course, you need to have your system set up with the various libraries that are required for automating real devices, things like libiMobile device and so on. But if you can currently connect to your real device using Appium, you'll be able to do the exact same thing with Appium Desktop and use the inspector.
Okay, very good. We have a question from Robert asking, Do you need to uninstall the Appium client to migrate to the desktop version?
No, you do not. They are completely separate. The desktop version has bundled within it its own version of Appium, so it won't conflict with any other versions that you have lying about your system.
Which leads to the next question from Nick. Can you specify a particular version of Appium with Appium Desktop?
That's actually something that I should have added on the roadmap slide. That's probably not going to come anytime soon. For now, each version of Appium Desktop will be bundled with a particular version of Appium. So you can see here that this one that I'm using at the moment has Appium 164 Beta 2. So we let you know what version is bundled with it. And so when new versions of Appium are released, we'll just cut a new release of Appium Desktop, which simply supports that new version of Appium. But in the future, and this is part of the vision of Appium 2.0, you'll be able to select not just different versions of Appium, but different versions of all of the drivers that you might care about using and kind of manage them in a graphical way from Appium Desktop as well.
Very good, very good. A couple of questions about XPath, and I know that you touched on that, but the question is, will there be XPath display in the new GUI in the future, although XPath is slow?
Yeah, well, yeah, as I sort of I'll show it again here. I did demonstrate that. I didn't demonstrate it fully. So we do, this is, I believe, the version that's of Appium that's either just been, version of Appium Desktop that's either just been released or just about to be released. We just added this feature in the last, I think I did it yesterday. So it's very new, but I'll just show you again here. Right, so if I, let's see, these all have names, but here's something without an accessibility ID. You can see that the recommended locator strategy here is XPath, and then here's the selector that will get you to the element that we have highlighted, of course, with the caveat that I mentioned earlier.
Okay, very good. One that we'll give it a whirl. For iOS native app automation, which path have you given, .app or IPA?
For native app, well, I guess it just depends on whether you're using a simulator or a real device. For a simulator, you use .app. If I can find an example here. And for a real device, you use IPA. So this one that I've got here is actually just using an app that I have up on S3, and I've zipped it up because it's on the internet. But if it were local, you wouldn't even need to zip it up. So yeah, .app for simulator, just build it for the simulator in Xcode, and .ipa for real device, which means you build it for your real device that you have provisioned and all that.
And I think this is related and goes to one of the core tenets of Appium, but the question is, does the .ipa need to be modified in any way to work with Appium?
No, it does not. Yeah, as long as it runs on your device, it will work with Appium.
Okay. Here's one I know that you'll be pleased to see. Do we have access to the Appium source code?
Yes, you know, I don't. I feel very ashamed because somehow in this whole presentation I did not stress that Appium was completely open source. So Appium is a project that is owned by the JS Foundation, which is a nonprofit open source foundation. And so it supports, along with Sauce Labs and some other groups, the development of Appium. And so Appium itself, excuse me, consists of many different code repositories that all combine to make the final product. This is the main project here, Appium/Appium on GitHub, and you can see the code. If you want the code for Appium Desktop, just Appium/Appium Desktop. And so you can go here. We've had people building it on their own. I don't think we've had any substantial contributions from the community yet, So if you are interested in making Appium Desktop better, helping us with any of our roadmap items, please, by all means, download this code. It's basically built in JavaScript with React and Redux as the front-end technologies, and of course using Electron as the packager and the display manager and so on.
Excellent. This is pretty granular, but since there is a WebDriver agent configuration, does it mean that iOS below 9.3.5 is not supported?
No, you can use Appium Desktop with lower iOS versions. I don't have any on my machine at the moment, or I'd do a demo. So all the demos you saw from me today were indeed XUI test base, but that's not necessary. It will work with iOS 9 or 8.4 or whatever, using the old Instruments API as well.
Okay, great. So we're nearing the top of the hour. I'll just dig up a couple of more to throw your way. Again, you'd mentioned that Appium is an Electron app, and Ken is asking, is there a way to open Appium Desktop in a web browser? Basically, is it possible to run Appium Desktop remotely with no installation needed?
No, it's currently not. The reason is that we depend on various bits of the system, and we use Electron to talk to Node.js to run Appium and so on. I think what would be possible is to factor out the inspector code and maybe run that in a web browser. Then you could. I don't think there's anything about the inspector that well, I guess there's cross-origin requests being made, so I'm not sure how that would work. But there's probably a way to turn the inspector into a web application that you could then attach to or have it speak to a running Appium server somewhere else. So that would be interesting. I don't think that's our main priority right now. That could be it could be interesting. It could be interesting to have it a hosted version of that somewhere, maybe on Sauce Labs. But for now, it's just here as the Electron app.
Okay. As mentioned at the outset, we are going to be sending out an email to follow up with a link to the recording and to the slides. But several people have asked if you could flash the slides that show the links to the various repos. I think you had those.
Sure, happy to do that. And before we end, I'd also like to go back to our poll. I'm not sure how I can see the results of that, but I think that would be great to see as well. Okay, let's see the links. Yeah, so again, to download, github.com/Appium/Appium Desktop/releases. And then for reporting issues, it's here. Basically, everything's on GitHub, so go to github/Appium and you'll probably find the right places soon enough.
All right. So I do have the results of the poll, and 79% say they prefer IDE and visual tools, and 21% reported code and command line tools.
All right. Well, that is very interesting, and probably, I guess, not totally unexpected for a presentation on a visual tool today. But that's really, really great to hear. Again, the team is very excited about Appium Desktop. There's probably things that we could do with it that we haven't even thought of yet. So go ahead and recommend features to us and help us build it. Well, thanks very much.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, everyone, for attending today. Andrew, for your help. We'll see you out on the internet.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you can complete that and provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Sauce Labs and our presenter, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.